Hey guys, my name's Todd and thank you so much for swinging by the channel and checking out this poker vlog. Mostly I just want to document this journey and see how we do. I've been playing poker professionally for the last 6 months now, and I know plenty of you that know me personally don't know much about poker. Those of you that do know about poker love these poker vlogs. So all that said, let's jump into some hands from last Friday, opening weekend at Horseshoe Indianapolis. Alright guys, we are here today playing 2-5 No Limit Texas Hold'em. The cap on this game is $1,000 and we buy in for the max. In the first interesting hand, we pick up King 10 of clubs in the small blind. Cutoff opens to 20, and with this specific hand, I think we can mix both calls, raises, and folds depending on who the big blind is and how they've been playing. I'm not too worried about the big blind in this hand, so I make the call and we go heads up to a flop. The flop is King Queen 5 with 2 spades and a heart, and I think our only option right now is to just check. Our opponent bets out $15, which seems more than reasonable to me, so I make the call. The turn is the 6 of hearts, bringing the backdoor flush draw. I think we still only have one option, and that's to go ahead and check. Our opponent now sizes up and bets $45. Again, I don't think we're strong enough to raise. I don't think we should be folding yet because there are way too many draws available, so I make the call once again. The river is a pretty bad card. It's the ace of spades, which brings in Jack 10 and the front door flush, and ace queen is now winning. Any other random ace is now winning. So we check it over once again, planning to fold to most river bets. He quickly checks it back though, and we end up losing to ace 4 of clubs. So pretty unfortunate river, as he was only drawing to 3 outs. If there's one way to relieve the sting from that last hand, it's looking down at pocket aces, and that's what ends up happening. We're in the cutoff with about $10.50 at play here, and LoJack opens the action to $20. I like to play for big pots when I have big hands like this, so I raise it to $75 and he makes the call. The flop is 9-8-5 rainbow, and I make a pretty standard c-bet of $50, which is about the sizing I would use with most of the hands I would play this way. And he makes the call. The turn isn't great though. It's the 9 of spades, which brings in a backdoor flush, but it also pairs the top card, and when the top card pairs, it's usually a good idea to check a hand like this back, so that's what I do. The river is the king of hearts, and when he checks one more time, I'm pretty confident we still have the best hand, so I go ahead and bet 160 into 250. Unfortunately, he folds, but that's okay. We take a nice little pot without going to showdown. We find another premium holding, this time in the form of ace-king offsuit from the hijack, and we open the action to $15. Our friend Nick in the big blind decides that that price is not enough, and he elects to bump it to $55, and I'm more than happy to make the call. I would probably mix in a 4-bet if this hand was suited, but since it's not, I'm more than happy to play this hand in position and see a flop. The flop is 10-8 deuce, so we completely whiff. But when he bets small for 35, which is a pretty standard sizing here, I think it's more than reasonable to just call and see what happens on the turn. He could certainly still have worse hands than we currently have, as we have the best no pair hand, so I make the call. The turn is another 10, and just like the last hand, when the top card pairs, this is usually bad for the 3-better, so he makes a pretty standard check, and I'm happy to check it back because we have plenty of showdown value here. The river is a deuce, so it pairs the bottom card. We're now chopping with every other ace high hand. But when he checks, I don't think it makes any sense for us to bet, so I take the showdown value and check it back, and he shows us ace-king offsuit, so we were chopping the entire time anyways. This just goes to show that it's okay to play ace-king a little passively sometimes when you miss the board entirely. So I hope you guys don't think I only play aces and ace-king. This is abnormal. I look down at aces once again. We're in middle position this time with about $12.50 at play. There is an early position limp, and I size up a little bit and raise to $20 this time. The small blind, who's been kind of running over the table at this point and playing almost every hand, calls, and the limper calls as well. So 3 ways to a flop. The flop is King 9-7, 2 spades and a club, and this is pretty dynamic, meaning that it's unlikely the best flopped hand will remain the best hand by the river. So for that reason, I size up and bet 45 into 60. And our friend in the small blind makes the call. The turn is the 10 of hearts, and while I can probably bet and fold to a raise here, when he checks, I check it back. This just seems like a card that will be improving his hand quite a bit of the time, just based on what I've seen him playing so far. The river is the 8 of spades, so the flush comes in. There's a 4-liner to a straight. There are a ton of hands that he could have 2 pair here with, so I'm just trying to get the showdown, and when he checks, I am more than happy to check it back and just hope I'm winning. And unfortunately, he shows us King 10 offsuit. He turned 2 pair, and he's gonna win this one. Next up, we see a limp from middle position and hijack, and I'm in the small blind and look down at ace-jack suited with about 1100 effective. I raise to $30, the big blind calls, and both of the limpers come along as well, so we're going to a flop 4 ways out of position. The flop is ace-queen deuce with a couple diamonds, and with top pair here, I bet 60. The big blind folds, and middle position now raises to 155. I go into the tank and try to figure out what exactly my opponent here is representing. I think the real question here is, does our opponent have any bluffs? Is he capable of bluffing with Jack 10 or a couple diamonds? And in game, I thought it was possible, so I make the call. I know it sounds crazy, but I think I can actually just fold here. Because what is he trying to represent? What hand does he just limp and then raise and get super aggressive with here on the flop? And it's probably just a suited ace deuce and pocket deuces. So like I said, I called, hoping that he would slow down somehow on the turn. The turn is a 6 of clubs, and when he bets 240 once again, I'm pretty much done with this hand, and I just let it go pretty quickly. Moving along, I top back up to the cap with $1,000 here, and I'm on the button with pocket sevens. Our friend, who's still been running over the table and playing almost every hand, opens low jack to $15. Hijack and I both call, and the small blind decides to 3-bet to 115. Low jack calls, the hijack folds, and I think with a couple opponents here at this stack depth, I can call and hope to hit a set. So that's what I do. The flop is King 7 deuce with 2 diamonds here. We drill middle set in position in a 3-bet pot. We're super happy, and we're even happier when the small blind checks and low jack bets 150 into $360 here. I go ahead and make the raise because I would like to get the money in as soon as possible, and I raise it to 375. The small blind, who is my only concern here of having pocket kings, gets out of the way, and low jack decides to jam all in for $1,000. I don't think we have any other option but to call, so that's what I do. I call pretty quickly, and he shows us the disaster of pocket kings. So we are now drawing to a single 7 or running diamonds to win this hand, and unfortunately I don't even know what the run out was because it wasn't either of those two, and we end up getting stacked. At this point we're stuck about a buy-in and a half, but we top back up to $1,000. I've actually played a handful of hands that are uninteresting, and we've been able to chip up to about 1,300 in the stack. I'm in middle position this time with Queen Jack of Hearts, and I open to $15. low jack, and both the small blind and the big blind call. The flop is Jack 10-4 with 2 clubs and a diamond, and with top pair here, I continuation bet 30, and low jack raises to 75. Kind of feels like we keep running into it here, doesn't it? But unlike that opponent from earlier, this opponent actually has the ability to bluff quite a few hands here. So with 3 cards to a straight and top pair with a mediocre kicker, I decide to make the call. The turn is the king of diamonds, so we do pick up some equity in the form of an open-ended straight draw. And when our opponent bets large to the tune of 150, it's pretty clear he has a big hand. But when we improve like this, I think we have to continue, so I make the call once again. The river is the 7 of diamonds, which brings in one of the flush draws and one of the straight draws. So when I check it, he actually checks it back pretty quickly, and we end up losing to Jack 10 offsuit, which is pretty unfortunate considering we had him completely dominated pre-flop. Next hand we're going to play, we look down at ace-9 of spades in early position, and we make it $15. The small blind only has about $650 in their stack, and they make the call. The flop is 10-5 deuce with a couple hearts and a spade, and because we have no showdown value and a backdoor flush draw, I think it's a good idea to start a bluff. So I continuation bet $10, and he makes the call. The turn is a really good bluff card for us, actually. It's the 3 of spades. So not only do we pick up our backdoor flush draw, but we also improve to a gut shot straight draw as well. So any spade or any 4, and we likely have the best hand. So for those reasons, I decide to put in an overbet of $65. Our opponent actually goes pretty deep into the tank and takes quite a while before they decide to go ahead and let it go. So it's most likely we bluffed a much better hand than ours off of the winner, which is always nice. Hard to believe, but we look down at pocket aces once again. We're in hijack with 1,000 effective here and opened to 20, and our friend Nick in the big blind defends. The flop is 9-5-9 rainbow here, and it's not great for us and our exact hand because he has quite a few 9s that he can defend the big blind with. So when he checks, I think we're in a scenario where we're either way ahead or we are way behind, so I decide to check it back. Turn is the 4 of clubs, which brings in a backdoor flush draw, and he checks once again. So now I'm pretty comfortable with betting. I go ahead and bet $15 into 40, and he puts in the check raise to 50. What are you doing, Nick? I think it's pretty standard to just call here. It's unlikely he puts us on a hand as strong as aces, and while we can still be losing to a 9 here sometimes, we could also be beating other hands. The river is the 7 of spades, and he bets $70. I think that's more than reasonable at a half pot price, so I make the call and win versus pocket queens. So somehow he loses the absolute minimum against us with a hand that he would almost always be re-raising us pre-flop. So well played, Nick. This is just one of those sessions where it seems like nothing is going our way. In this hand, we see an early position open to $15 and middle position and cutoff call, and I elect to go ahead and come along as well with ace-6 of hearts. This is a pretty trashy kicker with our ace here, so I'm not actually trying to flop top pair, but I am trying to flop a big flush draw in position against multiple opponents. And that's exactly what we get when the flop is king queen 10 with 2 hearts and a club. So not only do we flop the nut flush draw, but we also flop a gut shot straight draw as well. The pre-flop aggressor continues for $25 here, and all of us call. Some players like to raise a hand like ours in this scenario and try to take it down now, but I would much rather try to realize my equity and also potentially overflush someone with a lower flush and make a lot of money on those later streets. The turn is a brick in the deuce of clubs, and when early position bets 145 into 160, he is pretty polarized at this point. He is trying to say he has a huge hand, especially when he's betting into 3 opponents and there are clear draws on this board and he wants to charge those the max. The middle position player folds, but the player to our immediate right calls, which is pretty indicative of a flush draw, so I'm happy to see that. I don't think we're going to get any more money from early position because he is a good enough player to recognize what is happening, but I think we can make a lot of money from the player on our right, so I go ahead and make the call as well. And unfortunately, the river is the 10 of diamonds, so we miss our hand completely. Early position continues for $300, and our suspicion about the flush draw on our right is confirmed when he folds almost instantly. I don't have any option but to fold because we missed both of our draws, and funny enough, our opponent shows us ace-jack offsuit, so pretty good flop for his exact hand as he flopped the nuts. Moving along, we wake up with King 10 of diamonds in early position with about 975 effective and open the action to 15. Cutoff, button, and big blind all make the call, so we are going 4 ways to a flop. The flop is King Jack 4 with a couple clubs and a diamond, so we flop top pair and a couple backdoors. And even though we have top pair, I think it's still a good idea to balance top pair holdings occasionally with some of the best and some of the worst. So I go ahead and check, and the action checks through. The turn is the 9 of hearts, so we pick up some equity with that straight draw. And even though Queen 10 improves to a straight, I think it's unlikely anyone has that, as I would expect someone to start bluffing with Queen 10 on the flop. So I bet 40, and the button and big blind both make the call. The river is the king of hearts, so we improve the trips here, and it's really unlikely that one of our opponents puts us on a king, I would think. So I go ahead and bet 125, but unfortunately both opponents fold. Kind of unfortunate because we really wanted a call there from a non-believing jack. We find another very playable hand when we pick up ace-queen offsuit in the big blind. The hijack limps and the button raises to 30. I think this hand can probably go both ways. It can either raise or call. I probably do the re-raise most frequently, but I think it's still good to mix in really strong hands like this one into the calling range, so I go ahead and call, and the hijack calls as well. The flop is ace-4 deuce with a diamond draw, and it checks around to the button, who puts in a c-bet of $50. This is probably the best ace I'll ever have when I'm just calling pre-flop, so I think a check raise is more than justified. But in this exact moment, I wanted to go ahead and give the button some rope, so I just make the call, and the hijack gets out of the way. The turn pairs the middle card, which is much better for my defense range than probably the button's opening range, so I think I could actually lead here sometimes, but I check it over to him, and unfortunately he checks it back. The river is a jack, which is actually great for our hand. We do lose to ace-jack now. However, it is possible for us to get some value out of worst aces that no longer have a kicker that plays. So I go ahead and bet 125, hoping to get a call from a worse ace. Surprisingly, our opponent flashes us the ace of spades and then throws his hand into the muck. So not really sure how he got away from that one, but nice fold. And that's going to wrap it up for this session. I played for about 10 hours and got into the game for roughly $2,200 when it was all said and done, and I booked about a loss of $600, even with all of those premiums. So goes to show that it doesn't always work out, even when you pick up so many playable hands in a session. So what do you guys think? How'd we do today? If you have any feedback on any specific hand, I'd love to hear your comments on it. I'm sure I played some poorly, might have played some well, or maybe you learned something on a line to take in one of these hands that I just shared. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking around. please drop a like and a comment, and maybe a subscribe if this is something that you'd like to see more of. Thanks.